Okay, so we're going to match the cambial tissues together. We need a cleft cut in this rootstock. Oh, it doesn't need to be all that long. Actually, before we do that, if you look closely, you can see this rootstock has got a bud on it right there. There's another one down here. There's one on the other side too over here. These buds are going to grow and turn into little shoots. And we don't want the plant to put energy into that stuff. We want it to put energy into the new tree that's going to be grafted on here. So before you do anything else, wipe out any buds. Just get them off with your fingernail. They might just look like little tiny scales, but they'll turn into growing shoots. Get rid of them for now. They're gonna probably still grow. It'll take a little longer now that you've wiped them out, but there'll be some growth that comes out of there, and you just rub that off during the first and probably second years. You might get some, but get a head start on getting rid of it by getting rid of it right now. All right, now I'm holding on to the wood and the handle here. I'm putting my knife blade just dead center, and I'm just going to rock it real gentle. You want a nice sharp knife so that rocking it is actually going to make the cut. You don't need to push it real hard. Take your time. And I want to cut down in there that's, 3/4 of an inch long maybe. About like that. Hold it up to the camera here. Yeah. Now, can you see that cut from the top if I hold it up? Yeah, you kind of can. I didn't get it quite in the middle. That's still fine. Okay, there's our cleft cut. Now we need a piece of scion to stick in there. And take my piece of golden russet. And we want to make a piece. This is too short, only has one bud on it. I'll usually do 2 buds. I'm also doing something I should never do, which is holding the cut surface with my fingers. That'll get some salts and oils and stuff off your fingers on the living tissue and maybe kill it, so that you have less likelihood of succeeding at graft, or it'll be a weaker start. But in any event, what we're looking for is something that's tapered. It's a wedge shape like that, and that's going to go down in that cleft. You can see it's got a cut on both sides. And the way to make that cut, do everything super safely. I hold the knife against my body with my fist like this, holding the knife. I don't want to move the knife at all. That's how things get cut that I don't want to have cut. I hold the knife right there, and then I draw the wood across the blade. And you should probably get some material to practice with. Scion wood, sometimes you only have a stick or something. You want to get cut right. So get some other wood from an apple tree, cut some 1-year-old wood, and just practice with it. From a crab apple tree, anything like that. Practice with it to make these things. Now I'm going to start right below this bud. So I'm going to show you with my knife, but I'm going to hold my knife close to my body. I'm going to start that cut about there. And I've got the bud is pointing up. My blade is pointing up, so I'm making a cut through. Practice again. It takes a little time. That's a pretty long cut right there. It's going to be about half as long when I go through the other side. We'll cut part of this off, but that's a pretty nice one actually. It's fairly planar. You can see the bud again. So actually we want our bud to be on the side with the 2 tapering cuts on either side of the bud. So flip that bud over. I'm going to hold my knife still again and carefully draw this across. Oh yeah, okay, it's a little shorter than half, but that's still long enough. I would say that's 5/8 of an inch long, maybe. That's fine. We can work with that. Again, I want to be careful not to touch it. Now that I've got a good wedge cut on there, I'm going to trim this thing to 2 buds. You can see one right here and one right there. Those are both living buds. Either one of them, if they pop, is going to become the trunk of the tree. And they may both grow, in which case after a few weeks you'll probably take the stronger one and wipe the other one out. But let me just cut that. There's our scion. So you can imagine that with a piece of scion with this like 8 inches long, if you're careful, you can get 3, 4, maybe 5 pieces of scion out of it. Now we got to put the two together. Now sometimes when I make these cleft cuts, sometimes the gap is there. It's easy to get this wedge in there right away. Doesn't look like the case here. It's pretty tight, that little cut across. And I can't just push that in, so I got to have that opened up just a little bit. And so usually I'll just take my knife blade, stick it in there. You can see how the knife blade has opened that up. Lever it just a little bit. But usually my rootstock will grab onto that knife blade tight enough that I don't need to hold on to it. I can kind of let it keep things open while I get this put in place. Now look at that lowest bud. I want that to stick to the outside, and then of course when this goes in, I want to match the cambium up. So not like this, it's almost in the middle there. It needs to be out by the edge like that. We'll get it adjusted here in just a second. So let me put that in. Once I've got it started and the cleft cut holds it in, I take the blade out. Now I can get it adjusted. In fact, now I'm going to take it out of here. I don't have a knife around anymore. I've got my hands, one grabbing each part. I've got them again tight to my body so that I'm not like pushing and things are going to go flying. I'm going to break the cleft open more or bend the scion or something like that. If I've got my hands like this and then keeping them tight to my body, everything's going to happen in fractions of a millimeter. So I can get it adjusted just how I want. Just wiggle it down in there. That's pretty good. Now, if you look at that thing up close, that's actually a pretty good match. I'm going to show you the other side. It's not as good a match on this side. Well, it's hard to see, but it's not quite as good a match on this side. However, it's seated in there pretty well. You want to just get it matched up as well as you can. Once you've got that, then it's time to seal this thing up. I'm going to use both parafilm and the buddy tape, but use whatever you have. I've got both, so what I'm going to do is use the parafilm, which is a little bit thicker and stronger, at the bottom to kind of hold the cleft together. And I'm just wrapping it around. I'm going to use it to try and cover over that cut surface of the stock as best as possible and have it all sealed in like that. Now the entire stock and the scion are both, the cut surfaces are all sealed up. We've got it protected pretty much from just really egregious moisture loss, and you don't want there to be a bunch of moisture loss. And the graft is healing, which takes about 3 weeks, because otherwise your scion might die. Okay, so that's sealed in with the parafilm. Since I have this handy dandy buddy tape, I'm going to seal the whole scion too. It's somewhat more optional. First year I did about 400 grafts. I didn't do any of the sealing of the scion at all. I finished it just like that. And then I also actually had dipped the tip in candle wax because that's now a fresh cut. You can lose a little bit more moisture out of the bark of the little scion. It's pretty thin. So if you have the ability to seal it in, and this buddy tape is perfect for that because it's so thin and stretchy, then you can get the scion totally sealed up. Just twist the end there. There, that sucker is ready to go. That's pretty good. Now, you could do this part with parafilm too if you wanted, although it gets a little awkward. Parafilm is difficult enough to stretch that you may lever the scion out of its spot, which isn't too good. But anyway, if you get this sealed up, that's great. Whether you seal this thing up with some parafilm or with some buddy tape like I did, one layer of the stuff is not thick enough to constrain these buds from growing. When they start to swell, they're going to go right through it. So that's awesome. That means I don't have to worry about taking this stuff off. Later on in the summer, I will probably come back and cut through the parafilm at least. I'm not worried about the buddy tape. It'll just stretch. I'll probably come through and make one cut through the parafilm just so that it's not constraining this stalk. The this bit of what will be the trunk from growing at all. But even that is probably unnecessary unless you do some really heavy wrapping with the parafilm. And in any case, what you could do in a case like this, what I could do is I could just worry about undoing this next year. I'll probably never worry about taking the buddy tape off. Just not worth it. Anyway, so that's a finished one. Now, we have to get this thing to live until the graft takes. And that is a little process. I think I said earlier on, there are a lot of different things that you can do as you're moving along with grafting that will give your plant 1% extra advantage or a 1% disadvantage, depending on whether you do something or not. And I think that it's true that success with grafting and a lot of things is a matter of adding a lot of 1%s together. So do as many of these things as you can to ensure that the plant comes out strong, that the graft heals well, and so on. One of the things that you should do is avoid keeping roots out in the air like I have been for the last 10 minutes while I've been explaining this. That's not good for the roots. It's going to be a little bit of a setback for the plant. So usually what I do is I've got my rootstocks I'm going to use are sitting in a bucket of water, which is on the floor here. And the water is this deep, so the roots are completely down in there. And I usually will have a couple pieces of newsprint that are moist. And I will set them on the surface I'm working on. And right here I'm in the kitchen, I have a cutting board, but that's not what I do usually. I'm in the garage on a card table or something. I'll put the pieces of moistened newsprint down, and then after I make the first cut and maybe the cleft, I'll set it in there and just plop the wet newsprint over it so it's staying nice and moist while I worry about the scion. Then I'll take it out, put it together, wrap it, put it back in a bucket of water so it'll be sitting like that, finished in the water while I do a few other grafts. And then eventually I'll take these and I'll put them in like a 3-gallon pot. One of these things that you buy something from at the nursery. In fact, a lot of nurseries have them for free. There will be 4, 5, 6 holes on the bottom of the pot. That's good, you want drainage. I'll plug those holes somehow, maybe with a piece of real fine wispy cloth or some little rocks or something like that, so that when I fill it with sand, the sand doesn't run out the bottom when the sand gets wet. Then I put a little bit of sand in the bottom, and I'll take my bundle of finished grafts. I can fit about 20 in a bucket like that, bunch them all together, set them down in on top of the sand I've already put in there, and then backfill with more sand. When it's all full up above the roots, then water that sand in, set it on the driveway or something, water that sand in. When it's really saturated and there's a little water in there, you can go back and forth with the pot and the sand will almost liquefy and fill in some of the gaps between roots and between rootstocks so that you have better kind of infill and not a bunch of airspace in there, which is good for the health of the plant as well. Then once you have this thing, this bucket or a pot of finished grafts done, then they need to heal. And for apples, it turns out, and this is also true for pears, but it's not true, say, for stone fruits like peaches and apricots, the ideal temperature range for this to heal is like 40, 50 degrees. So a lot of times I'm doing my grafting in early March, too early to plant out. We could still have really severe weather, but my garage at that point is not so cold that I'm going to get any damage in the garage. Almost certainly won't get any damage in the garage, but it's cold enough that it's probably perfect temperature for this, and it keeps everything dormant longer. And that's good because it gives several weeks of time for this thing to heal before the buds even start to think about popping. And if I waited longer and I got these rootstocks in early March, like I do, and I waited until April to do the grafting, like I'm doing right now, some of the buds on the rootstock may start to swell. Things start to get a little more active. It's not going to have as long a period of time, even in a nice cold garage. It's going to, it's kind of started. So if you can do it earlier, that's great. If not, you're still going to have plenty of success in April. I'm not worried about doing grafts this way at all, but all other things considered, I would do them in early mid-March and leave them in the garage in the buckets, in the pots, and then every now and then I need to check and make sure the sand is moist. So I'll take it out on the driveway, water it, let it drain, put it back in the garage. And then after about 3 weeks it should be relatively healed up, but I can leave it in there as long as the scion isn't starting to grow. Once the scion buds start to push, then you need to start thinking about getting it in the ground. Usually for me, I can keep the garage cold enough that they don't start to push buds until mid-April or something, and that's a fine planting time for Boulder, Colorado. So that's sort of the timing of things. Before I show you the whip and tongue graft, I should talk about buying rootstocks and buying scion wood. I mentioned several nurseries you can get rootstocks from. Sometimes for the larger quantities, they get bought up early, so I actually order mine in like September. And depending on who you order from, you might even have to pay in September, but if you want a large quantity, you get a better price, but you also need sometimes to pay attention and buy them earlier so they don't run out. Same time you're thinking about buying 25 or 50 or something, the retail nurseries like Cummins or Raintree are buying bundles up too, and they'll split them out and just sell you 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever you need, 10, at a little bit higher price. So if you just need a few, go to one of the retail nurseries, and you can probably do it later, like in January or something. If you got to buy a bunch, better to order them early, September, October, something like that. What else? When I get the rootstocks, they're going to be wrapped, all of them bunched together in big bundles, in big plastic bags, usually with either shredded newsprint or some sawdust or something that's all moist, to keep them moist while they're shipped. When I first get the rootstocks, I will take them all out and plunk them in a bucket of water, again, up above the roots, and just let them sit there for a couple hours so that they can imbibe some water and get over a little bit of the stress that they've had from shipping. Once that's done, I'll take my rootstocks. They're usually bound with a little piece of binding ribbon or tape or something sort of heavy duty. Usually cut that. There are often 2 of them, one at the bottom, one at the top. Cut that, take those things off. So I've got these in a loose bunch now, and I'll set up a pot with sand like I described for putting your finished grafts in, and I'll store my rootstocks in that sand. So when I want to do 10 of something, I'll go get 10 of them out of there, fill it back up with sand after I've taken them out, kind of excavate out, and then deep enough that you can get 10 out of there without tearing things up. Get them a little bit loose before you pull them out. And put these in the bucket that you're going to work from, the water bucket. Fill the sand back into the bucket with the rootstocks and push it down. Maybe you can get a little bit of water in there so everything's staying moist. Set it aside, and then you've got these rootstocks in the bucket to work with. And then you can do what we're doing here, and we kind of repeat it backwards. As I do 10 of these, I put the finished grafts back in a bucket of water. When the 10 are finished, I'll take the 10 as a bundle, maybe 20, put them in a different pot of sand, keep that moist while they're healing up. So that's sort of the process. This poor thing has been out of the water for a long time. It's probably still okay, but as a rule, try not to do that. In fact, another thing to think about, it might be tempting to work outside on a nice day, but I wouldn't want to have this stuff exposed to